Kieran Gallagher pushed open the door of the small cafe, the scent of freshly brewed coffee wrapping around him like a warm embrace. He glanced around, taking in the cozy atmosphere, the soft hum of conversation, and the quiet clinking of ceramic cups. It was a stark contrast to the polished steel and glass of his corporate world, a world where his name commanded respect and his decisions shaped industries. But here, no one knew him, and that was exactly what he wanted. He had spent the last decade building Gallagher Enterprises into a powerhouse, his life a constant whirlwind of board meetings, private jets, and billion-dollar deals. Yet lately, something felt off, hollow. Maybe that was why he'd walked into this cafe and escaped from the suffocating expectations tied to his name. "Welcome to Ella's Cafe. What can I get you?" Kieran looked up to see the woman behind the counter, and for the first time in years, he felt his world tilt. She was stunning in a way that had nothing to do with expensive dresses or designer makeup. Her dark brown hair was pulled into a loose ponytail, a few strands escaping to frame her face, and her deep hazel eyes held a warmth that made him momentarily forget how to speak. He cleared his throat, suddenly aware of how ridiculous he must look standing there like an idiot. "Just a black coffee," she smiled, grabbing a cup. "You got it." Her name tag read Emery, and somehow the name suited her, simple yet strong. As she worked, Kieran studied her. She moved with practiced ease, her hands steady, her expression focused. There was something about her, something real. "Here you go," she said, sliding the cup toward him. "That'll be $3. He dug into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled bill, handing it to her. Normally, he never carried cash. His life was all about digital transactions and black Amex cards, but today, he had grabbed whatever was in his car's glove compartment. "Keep the change," he said, taking the cup. She laughed lightly. "You just tipped me a whole 50 cents. Generous." Kieran blinked, then looked down at the coins she had placed on the counter. He almost laughed. He had more money in his bank account than most people saw in a lifetime, yet here he was, accidentally tipping like a broke college student. "Next time I'll do better," he promised, surprising himself. She grinned, wiping her hands on a towel. "I'll hold you to that." Kieran moved to a table by the window, sipping his coffee as he watched Emery interact with customers. She knew most of them by name, remembering their usual orders, asking about their kids, their jobs, their lives. She wasn't just working here, she was part of this place. He should leave. He had calls to make, contracts to review. But instead, he sat there, drinking coffee that was surprisingly good, watching a woman who had no idea she had just unknowingly hooked the attention of a man who never let himself be distracted. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like Kieran Gallagher, billionaire CEO. He was just a man in a cafe, drinking coffee, looking at a woman he suddenly wanted to know everything about. He just had no idea that this woman would change everything. Kieran hadn't planned on coming back the next day, or the day after that. But somehow, he found himself making Ella's Cafe a part of his morning routine. It was irrational. He didn't need to be here. His penthouse had a state-of-the-art espresso machine, and his office stocked imported coffee beans that cost more than most people's weekly groceries. But none of that had the same appeal as sitting at a corner table in this small cafe, watching Emery move through the morning rush with effortless ease. She had no idea who he was. That fact alone intrigued him. In his world, people either sought his approval or feared his power. But Emery. She treated him like any other customer, offering brief smiles and casual conversation before rushing off to the next order. On the fifth morning, as he approached the counter, she gave him a knowing look. "You again." "Should I start memorizing your order?" Kieran leaned slightly against the counter, feigning nonchalance. "I'd be insulted if you didn't." She raised an eyebrow, amused. "Black coffee, no sugar, no nonsense." "Not exactly complicated. Maybe I enjoy consistency. Or maybe you just really like our coffee." Kieran hesitated. He could have said something smooth, something flippant. Instead, he found himself saying the truth. "Maybe I just like this place." Her expression softened, but before she could respond, a loud crash came from the back. Emery spun around, sighing. "That'll be my sister." Kieran watched as she hurried through a doorway behind the counter. Moments later, a younger woman with similar features emerged, grumbling under her breath as she wiped flour off her apron. "You okay back there?" Emery asked, re-emerging with a dish towel in hand. "Define okay," her sister muttered. "The mixer attacked me," Kieran chuckled quietly to himself as Emery handed her a fresh towel. "Lena, this is a coffee shop, not a battlefield," Lena groaned. "Tell that to the dough." Then her gaze landed on Kieran, and she tilted her head in curiosity. "Wait, is this the guy?" Emery's eyes widened. "Lena, the one you said keeps coming back." Kieran turned his attention to Emery, who was suddenly very interested in wiping the counter. He fought the urge to grin. "You've been talking about me," she exhaled sharply, glaring at her sister. "I mention all our regulars." Lena smirked. "Sure." Kieran found himself enjoying this more than he should. He had sat in enough boardrooms to recognize when someone was trying to deflect, but Emery's flustered reaction was far more entertaining than any corporate maneuvering. Before she could say anything further, the door chimed, signaling another customer. Emery exhaled in relief and turned to take their order, clearly desperate for an escape. Kieran didn't push. He simply took his coffee, nodded at Lena, and returned to his usual table. But now, he had confirmation of something he had already suspected. Emery had noticed him too. That knowledge lingered with him for the rest of the day. A week later, Kieran arrived to find the cafe unexpectedly quiet. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a golden glow over the wooden floors. Emery stood behind the counter, wiping down the espresso machine. "Slow day?" he asked as he approached. She glanced up and let out a weary sigh, more like slow week. "It happens sometimes." Kieran frowned slightly. He had never given much thought to the struggles of small businesses, but now, seeing the concern flicker across her face, he found himself wanting to fix it. "Anything I can do?" he asked, surprising himself. She let out a light laugh. "Unless you know how to magically attract customers, I think we're stuck with the slump." Kieran didn't respond immediately. Instead, an idea began to form in his mind. It was reckless, unnecessary, and completely unlike him. But as he watched Emery tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, he realized something he didn't care. For the first time in years, he wanted to do something not because it benefited his company or his reputation, but simply because he wanted to see her smile. And Kieran Gallagher always got what he wanted. Kieran had never been one for impulsive decisions. Every move he made in business was calculated, every investment meticulously analyzed. Yet, as he sat in his penthouse that evening, overlooking the glittering city skyline, his mind kept circling back to Emery and her struggling cafe. He had the means to help. He could write a check large enough to erase any financial worries she had, but he already knew she wouldn't accept it. Emery wasn't the type to take handouts. If he wanted to do this, he had to be smart about it. Pulling out his phone, he made a call. Within minutes, his assistant, Daniel, picked up. "I need you to find out everything you can about Ella's Café," Kieran said. "Financials, lease agreements, suppliers, everything." There was a pause on the other end. "Sir, are you thinking of acquiring it?" Kieran exhaled, rubbing his jaw. "Not exactly, just get me the information." Daniel didn't ask any more questions. He never did. That was part of why Kieran kept him around. The next morning, Kieran walked into the cafe like usual, but this time, his gaze swept over everything with new awareness. The chairs had seen better days, the paint on the walls was fading, and the espresso machine let out a concerning sputter every time it was used. The place had charm, but it needed help. Emery stood behind the counter, her hair pulled up in a messy bun, exhaustion shadowing her features. She still greeted him with her usual warmth, but he could see the stress behind it. "Rough morning?" he asked as he handed her a $20 bill for his coffee. She hesitated, as if debating whether to admit it, then sighed. "More like a rough month. Rent's going up and our supplier raised their prices again. We'll figure it out, though." Kieran leaned against the counter. "What if you didn't have to just figure it out? What if there was a way to bring in more customers?" She tilted her head. "You have a secret marketing plan?" "Maybe." He took a sip of his coffee, considering his next words carefully. What if you hosted an event here, something that would get people talking? Emery frowned slightly, considering it. Like what? He shrugged. A community night. Live music, special menu, maybe even a raffle, something to remind people why they love this place. She exhaled, wiping her hands on a towel. That's actually not a bad idea. Kieran hid his satisfaction. I'll help. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Why? Because I like this place, he said simply, and I don't want to see it struggle. Emery studied him for a long moment, as if trying to read between the lines, then finally nodded. All right, let's do it. Planning the event turned out to be more involved than Emery had expected. Between organizing food, finding a musician, and spreading the word, she barely had time to breathe. True to his word, Kieran was there every step of the way. He secured a local band, helped draft promotional flyers, and even convinced a bakery down the street to donate pastries for the night. She had never seen this side of him before. He wasn't just a quiet customer who sat in the corner with his black coffee. He was decisive, efficient, and incredibly resourceful. One evening, after closing, they sat at a booth going over final details. Emery stretched her arms over her head, exhaustion evident in her posture. You didn't have to do all this, she said. I mean, I appreciate it, but I don't get why you're so invested. Kieran leaned back, his gaze steady. Maybe I just like seeing you succeed. Her breath hitched slightly, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The air between them shifted, charged with something unspoken. Emery looked away first, shaking her head with a soft laugh. You're full of surprises, you know that? Kieran smiled slightly, but he didn't respond. Instead, he reached across the table and picked up a flyer they had designed. This is going to work, he said, his voice certain. People will show up. Emery exhaled slowly. I hope so. She didn't know that Kieran had already taken extra steps to ensure that. He had discreetly reached out to a few influential food bloggers, subtly hinting at an exciting new event they wouldn't want to miss. By the time the night arrived, the cafe would be full. And when Emery saw the success of it all, she'd have no idea that the man who had been sitting in her cafe every morning was the one who had orchestrated it behind the scenes. The night of the event arrived, and the cafe was nearly unrecognizable. Twinkling string lights cast a warm glow over the space, giving it an intimate, inviting feel. A small stage had been set up in the corner for the live band, and the air buzzed with the scent of freshly brewed coffee and sweet pastries. Kieran stood at the back, watching as people poured in. It was more than he had anticipated. The cafe, which had struggled with slow days, was now alive with chatter and laughter. Emery moved through the crowd, greeting customers, her face alight with a happiness he hadn't seen before. She was radiant, her usual ponytail replaced with a loose braid that tumbled over one shoulder. There was a different energy in her tonight, lighter, freer, as if the weight she had been carrying for weeks had finally lifted. Seeing her like this, Kieran felt something shift in his chest. He had meant for this to be a simple gesture, a way to help, but it was more than that now. It had been for a while. Emery caught his gaze across the room. For a moment, everything else faded. He saw the silent gratitude in her eyes, the unspoken question of why he had done all this for her. And for the first time, he wasn't sure how to answer. Lena interrupted the moment, calling Emery's name and pulling her into the kitchen. Kieran exhaled, running a hand through his hair. He was in deep. The band started playing, and the atmosphere grew even warmer. People swayed to the music, sipping their drinks, settling into conversations. Kieran took a seat at his usual corner table, watching it all unfold. He had done what he set out to do. The cafe was thriving, if only for one night, but for the first time in his life, success didn't feel like enough. After a while, Emery slipped into the seat across from him, her cheeks flushed from the excitement of the evening. She let out a breath, shaking her head in amazement. I can't believe this. Kieran leaned forward slightly, resting his arms on the table. Believe it. This place was always special. People just needed a reason to remember that. She studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. You didn't have to do all this. I wanted to. Something flickered in her eyes, something uncertain but undeniably there. I don't get you, Kieran. You're this quiet guy who comes in every morning, orders the same coffee, never asks for anything more. And then suddenly, you're planning events and saving cafes. He held her gaze, choosing his words carefully. Maybe I wanted to be more than just the guy who orders coffee. Her breath hitched slightly, and Kieran knew she felt it too, the pull between them, the way the air seemed to hum whenever they were close. Before she could respond, Lena appeared beside the table, nudging Emery with an exaggerated wink. Come on, Em, they're asking for you up front. Emery blinked, breaking the moment. She hesitated, as if torn, then sighed and stood. Duty calls. Kieran watched her go, a strange ache settling in his chest. Lena lingered, crossing her arms. You know, I don't think I've ever seen my sister look at someone the way she looks at you. Kieran turned to her, raising an eyebrow. And how is that? Lena shrugged, a knowing glint in her eyes, like she's not sure whether to run away or run straight to you. Kieran exhaled, rubbing his jaw. And which do you think she'll choose? Lena smiled. That's up to you. With that, she disappeared into the crowd, leaving Kieran alone with the weight of his own thoughts. The night carried on, laughter and music filling the air. Kieran stayed, not just because he had helped create this night, but because Emery was here. Because no matter how much he tried to rationalize it, he wasn't ready to leave. And maybe, just maybe, he never wanted to. As the night carried on, the cafe remained alive with energy, a warmth lingering in the air long after the music ended. Emery stood near the counter, watching as customers reluctantly trickled out, their voices still buzzing with excitement about the event. It had been a success more than she had dared to hope. She turned, searching the room until her gaze landed on Kieran. He was still at his usual table, his expression unreadable as he observed the evening winding down. Something in her chest tightened. There was something about him, something steady, something that had made her feel for the first time in a long while that she wasn't carrying everything alone. Lena nudged her on the arm as she passed. He's waiting for you, you know. Emery rolled her eyes, but she didn't deny it. With a deep breath, she crossed the room and slid into the seat across from him. He set his coffee cup down, looking at her with quiet amusement. I think you pulled it off, he said. She let out a breathless laugh, shaking her head. We pulled it off. He didn't argue, but there was something in his expression, something thoughtful. She had noticed it before, the way he seemed to study everything, as if he were always calculating, always thinking 2 steps ahead. She leaned forward slightly, resting her arms on the table. All right, tell me the truth. Who are you, really? His brows lifted slightly, but he didn't look surprised. What do you mean? She gestured vaguely toward him. You've been coming here for weeks, acting like a regular guy who just happens to like coffee, but regular guys don't do what you did tonight. They don't pull strings and make things happen like it's second nature. She hesitated before continuing, and I don't think you're just someone who stumbled in here by accident. For a moment, he said nothing, as if weighing his response. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he exhaled and leaned back in his chair. You're right. She blinked, not expecting him to admit it so easily. I'm not just some guy who likes coffee, he continued. I own a company, several actually. Something inside her stilled. She hadn't expected that. Like a business owner, he tilted his head slightly, more like a CEO, her stomach flipped. Of what? Gallagher Enterprises. The words hit her like a shockwave. She had heard that name before everyone had. It was one of the biggest corporations in the country, spanning industries from finance to real estate. She stared at him, her mind scrambling to catch up. You're telling me that you, Kieran, my regular coffee customer, run one of the most powerful companies in the city? He held her gaze, his expression calm. Yes. Emery sat back, exhaling sharply. That's a lot to process. I know. She shook her head, still trying to wrap her mind around it. Why didn't you tell me? His fingers tapped lightly against the edge of his cup. Because I didn't want it to change anything. She frowned. What does that mean? He hesitated, then leaned forward again, his voice quieter. People see wealth before they see the person behind it. I didn't want that with you. Something in his tone made her heart stutter. He hadn't just been keeping a secret, he had been protecting something. Her emotions tangled together, surprise, confusion, something deeper she wasn't ready to name. So you've just been pretending to be a normal guy? He gave a small shake of his head. No, I wasn't pretending. This being here, talking to you, it was the most real thing I've had in a long time. Her breath hitched, and she hated how much those words affected her. But there was still the lingering weight of the deception, the fact that he had kept something so massive from her. She swallowed hard. I don't know what to do with this. I don't expect you to figure it out right now, he said gently. I just needed you to know. She studied him, searching for any trace of dishonesty, but there was none. Just a man who had walked into her cafe as a stranger and somehow become something more. The cafe had emptied out almost entirely now, leaving only the last traces of laughter and music lingering in the air. Emery exhaled, standing from the table. I need some time to think. Kieran nodded, as if he had expected that. Take all the time you need. She turned, heading toward the back of the cafe, but before she disappeared into the kitchen, she glanced over her shoulder. He was still watching her, his expression unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, something raw, something real. And despite everything, she wasn't sure she wanted him to leave. Emery had barely slept. She had spent the night replaying everything, the event, the way Kieran had been there for her, and most of all, his confession. The man she had thought was just a quiet, coffee-loving regular was actually a billionaire CEO, someone who controlled entire industries with a single decision. And he hadn't told her. Not because he was playing a game, she realized, but because he had wanted something real. And that knowledge unsettled her more than anything else. Because despite the shock of it all, she couldn't deny what she already knew deep down. She felt something for him, something she wasn't sure she had the strength to ignore. By the time she arrived at the cafe the next morning, Lena had already opened up, the scent of fresh bread and espresso filling the air. Emery stepped inside, bracing herself for the inevitable questions. Lena took one look at her face and let out an exaggerated sigh. You didn't call me last night, which means you're still spiraling. Emery groaned, setting her bag down behind the counter. Not spiraling, just thinking. Thinking or overthinking? Emery tossed a dish towel at her sister, but Lena dodged it easily, grinning. Then her expression softened. Come on, Em, what's stopping you? Emery hesitated, gripping the edge of the counter. I don't know, it's just, he's Kieran Gallagher, he's not just some guy, he's a man who helped save this place, Lena interrupted. A man who, by the way, looked at you like you hung the stars last night. Emery swallowed hard. It's not that simple. Lena crossed her arms. Isn't it? Before Emery could respond, the cafe door opened and all the air seemed to leave the room. Kieran stood in the entrance, his presence commanding as always, but there was an uncertainty in his eyes she had never seen before. He wasn't here as a CEO, he wasn't here as the man who had orchestrated last night's success. He was just Kieran, waiting. Lena took one look between them and muttered something about checking inventory before disappearing into the back, leaving them alone. Emery took a slow breath, forcing herself to meet his gaze. You came back. His lips quirked slightly. Did you think I wouldn't? She shook her head. I don't know what I thought. He stepped closer, his voice quieter now. Did you get the time you needed? She exhaled. I don't think time is the problem, it's me. I don't know how to fit into your world, Kieran, and I don't know how you fit into mine. He studied her for a long moment, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He set it on the counter between them. She frowned. What's this? Your cafe's lease, paid in full for the next 5 years. Her heart lurched. You, Kieran, no. I can't, you're not taking a handout, he interrupted gently. Think of it as an investment. You believe in this place, so do I. She stared at the paper, overwhelmed. I don't know what to say. Then don't say anything, he said softly. Just let me be in your world, Emery. However you'll have me. Her throat tightened. This man, this maddening, breathtaking man, had done nothing but prove himself at every turn, and now he was giving her the choice. Something inside her finally gave way. She reached for him, her fingers curling into the front of his jacket as she pulled him forward. His breath caught, but then he was kissing her, and nothing else mattered. The cafe, the customers, the entire world faded away as his arms wrapped around her, grounding her, holding her like she was the only thing that had ever made sense. When they finally broke apart, she rested her forehead against his, her pulse racing. Okay, she whispered. Stay. His grip tightened. Always. Months later, the cafe was thriving. Word had spread after the event, and business had never been better. Emery had expanded the menu, renovated the space, and even started hosting monthly community nights. And Kieran. He was still there every morning at his usual table. Only now, he wasn't just the man who came in for coffee. He was the man who walked her home at night, who helped her close up after long shifts, who kissed her breathless when she least expected it. One evening, as they stood outside the cafe, Kieran took her hand, his thumb tracing over her knuckles. "Come away with me this weekend," she raised an eyebrow. "Where? You'll see." She narrowed her eyes playfully but didn't argue, because with him, she had learned to trust the unknown. That weekend, he took her to a private estate overlooking the ocean. The air was crisp, the waves crashing below as they stood on the balcony, wrapped in the golden glow of sunset. And then he dropped to one knee. Emery's breath caught as he pulled out a ring, the diamond catching the fading light. "I never expected to walk into that cafe and find the one thing I never knew I was missing," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "I love you, Emery. Not just for who you are, but for how you've changed me, for the way you make everything make sense." She pressed a hand to her mouth, tears welling. "Say yes," he murmured. "Marry me." She let out a shaky laugh, nodding before she could even find the words. "Yes," she whispered. Then louder as she flung herself into his arms. "Yes," he kissed her, deep and desperate, sealing the promise between them. And as the waves roared below, Emery knew this was exactly where she was meant to be, with him.